There's absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead.
But then you hear
let me finish, please. There's absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead, and there's absolutely no evidence that we were involved in a disappearance. That is the conclusion. Let me finish. That is the conclusion of the process, and that's what we're here debating.
The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. when Jane Tanner finally broke. After years of sleepless nights, the weight of silence had become unbearable. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the number. One call could shatter everything they'd built, the carefully constructed narrative, the pact that bound 7 friends together in the aftermath of that night in Portugal. But some truths refused to stay buried. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to herself, the blue light of her screen illuminating tears she'd held back for too long. "I have to tell them what I really saw." For 16 years, the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann has haunted our collective consciousness. A child vanishing from a vacation apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, while her parents dined with friends just 180 feet away. It's the nightmare that launched 1,000 headlines, spawned countless theories, and became the most heavily reported missing person case in modern history. But behind the media frenzy and public speculation stood 7 individuals who knew more than they initially revealed, the friends who dined with Kate and Gerry McCann on May 3, 2007, the group that would come to be known as the Tapas 7. Their accounts formed the foundation of the investigation. Their testimonies shaped public perception. Their silence protected something, until one of them couldn't bear it any longer. What drives someone to finally speak up after years of keeping secrets? What revelation could be so significant that it risked friendships, reputations, and potentially legal consequences? And most importantly, how does this new information change everything we thought we knew about what happened to Madeleine McCann? Tonight we're diving into the case that continues to captivate the world, focusing on the bombshell testimony that sent investigators scrambling and forced everyone to reconsider the timeline of that fateful evening. The testimony that contradicts official statements and opens up entirely new possibilities about who took Madeleine and why. Have you ever wondered what really happened that night in Portugal? The answer might lie not in what was said during those initial interviews, but in what was deliberately left out. Before we continue this journey together, I want to ask, if you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries and the human stories behind them, hit subscribe now. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the truth behind cases just like this one, where a single revelation can change everything we thought we knew. Now, let's turn back the clock to 2007, to a seaside resort where a family vacation would become the epicenter of one of the most enduring mysteries of our time, and to the group of friends whose dinner reservation would place them at the heart of a case that remains unsolved to this day. Madeleine Beth McCann entered the world on May 12, 2003 in Leicester, England, a spring baby with distinctive eyes. Her right pupil featured a rare coloboma, creating a black keyhole-shaped mark that extended into her iris. This unique characteristic would later become instantly recognizable on missing posters across the globe. By all accounts, Madeleine was a spirited child, bright, talkative, and full of energy. Her parents described her as confident beyond her years, a natural performer who loved attention. Home videos show a beaming little girl dancing in princess costumes, giggling with her younger twin siblings, and chattering away with the distinctive vocabulary of a child just discovering the world. She was quite knowing, Kate would later recall in interviews. She was very aware of what was going on around her. She'd pick up on things that sometimes I wouldn't even pick up on. Kate and Gerry McCann represented the epitome of British professional success. Both worked as physicians, Kate as a general practitioner who had scaled back to part-time after having children, and Gerry as a respected cardiologist at Glenfield Hospital in Leicester. They met in 1993 while both were working in Glasgow, married in 1998, and after struggling with fertility issues, welcomed Madeleine through IVF in 2003. The twins, Sean and Amelie, followed 2 years later, also conceived through IVF. Friends described the McCanns as devoted, organized parents who maintained routines and boundaries. Their home in Rothley, Leicestershire was the picture of middle-class British comfort, a brick house with a garden where the children played, located in a close-knit village community. The decision to vacation in Portugal's Algarve region came through a special offer from Mark Warner Resorts extended to doctors. The Ocean Club in Praia da Luz promised family-friendly accommodations with childcare options that would allow the parents some much-needed relaxation. Several friends, also medical professionals with young children, decided to join, creating what should have been an idyllic group holiday. Praia da Luz, Beach of Light, lived up to its poetic name. A former fishing village transformed into a tourist haven, it featured whitewashed buildings with terracotta roofs cascading down to golden beaches and the azure Atlantic. The resort town maintained a relaxed atmosphere, with narrow cobblestone streets opening to a central plaza, where locals and tourists mingled in cafes and restaurants. The Ocean Club wasn't a single building, but a collection of apartments and facilities spread throughout the village. The McCann's ground-floor apartment, 5A, sat on Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, with a sliding patio door that opened to a small veranda surrounded by waist-high walls. Beyond this barrier lay a public street and a small pool area. From the apartment's rear windows, you could glimpse the Tapas restaurant where the adults would dine each evening, approximately 180 feet away across the pool. The layout would later become crucial to understanding the case. While close enough that the adults felt comfortable with their dinner arrangement, apartment 5A was positioned at the corner of the block with multiple access points from public areas. It was one of the most vulnerable units in the complex, a fact that would take on grim significance. The McCanns arrived on Saturday, April 28, 2007, with nearly a week of vacation ahead. Photos from those early days show Madeleine playing in the children's pool, building sandcastles on the beach and enjoying an ice cream with her father. In one particularly poignant image, she sits proudly wearing a new pink hat and sunglasses, her smile radiating the simple joy of a child on holiday. No one could have predicted that within days, this ordinary family vacation would transform into an extraordinary tragedy, one that would expose the McCanns to unimaginable scrutiny, divide public opinion, and launch a global search that continues to this day. As the family settled into their routine at the Ocean Club, they were unaware that the resort's layout, their evening dining habits, and the decisions they were about to make would soon be dissected by investigators, journalists, and armchair detectives around the world. Thursday, May 3, 2007, began as another pleasant day in Praia da Luz. The McCann family followed what had become their vacation routine: breakfast in their apartment, followed by dropping the children at the resort's kids' clubs. Madeleine attended the Lobsters group for her age range, while the twins went to the toddler group. That morning, staff took a photo of Madeleine sitting by the pool with other children and her father, one of the last documented images of her. The afternoon brought a mini tennis session for Madeleine, followed by a family trip to the pool. Kate would later recall Madeleine saying it was the best day ever. Around 6 p.m., the family returned to apartment 5A. Kate bathed the children while Gerry played tennis with a friend. By 7 p.m., all three children were in their pajamas, teeth brushed, ready for bed. Madeleine wore pink and white Eeyore pajamas. The twins were placed in travel cots in the same bedroom, while Madeleine slept in a single bed near the window. By 8:30 p.m., according to the McCanns, all three children were asleep. Kate and Gerry performed a final check, then left through the patio doors, which they later claimed they left unlocked, and walked to the Tapas restaurant to join their friends. The group that would become known as the Tapas 7 consisted of Dr. Russell O'Brien and Jane Tanner, a couple from Exeter with two young daughters, Dr. Matthew Oldfield and his wife Rachel, both physicians, with their daughter, Dr. David Payne, his wife Fiona, and her mother Diane Webster. The Paynes brought their two children. These weren't random holiday acquaintances. The connections ran deep. Fiona and Rachel had been friends since university. David Payne had worked with Gerry at hospitals in Leicester. Russell O'Brien and Matthew Oldfield had medical connections to the group. They were bound by professional backgrounds, similar life stages, and the comfortable familiarity of people who understood each other's worlds. The 9 adults had reserved the same table at the Tapas restaurant each night of their vacation, a practice that later raised questions about the predictability of their routine. Their table sat on the restaurant's terrace, partially obscured from the apartments by a wall and foliage. That evening, they implemented what they called their checking system, a rotation where parents would periodically leave the table to check on their sleeping children. The McCann's apartment was among the farthest from the restaurant, requiring a walk around the pool area and beyond the resort's boundaries onto public streets. According to the timeline they provided to police, 8:35 p.m., Gerry McCann checked on the children and reported all was well. 9:05 p.m., Jane Tanner, while returning to the restaurant after checking her own children, claimed she saw a man carrying a child in pajamas walking across the top of the road. This sighting would become one of the investigation's most contested elements. 9:30 p.m., Matthew Oldfield volunteered to check the McCann children while checking his own. He later stated he entered apartment 5A through the unlocked patio doors, but only listened from the children's bedroom doorway without actually seeing Madeleine. 10 p.m., Kate McCann went to check and discovered Madeleine's bed empty. The bedroom window was open wider than they had left it, and the shutters were raised. Kate immediately ran back to the restaurant crying, "They've taken her! They've taken her!" What followed was chaos. Gerry McCann and their friends immediately began searching the apartment complex and surrounding streets. Resort staff joined the effort. At 10:41 p.m., the first call was made to the Polícia Judiciária, PJ, Portugal's criminal investigation police. Local police arrived around 11 hours p.m., but crucial early hours passed without securing the scene or implementing border controls. By midnight, resort staff and guests had thoroughly contaminated what should have been treated as a crime scene. People moved freely through apartment 5A, touching surfaces and disturbing potential evidence. The Portuguese police, unaccustomed to child abduction cases, failed to implement standard protocols like sealing off the apartment or conducting immediate forensic examinations. But what if everything we thought we knew was wrong? The timeline above represents the official account provided by the McCanns and their friends. Yet inconsistencies emerged almost immediately. Restaurant staff disputed the frequency of the checks, suggesting they weren't as regular as claimed. Neighbors reported hearing children crying in the apartment on previous nights. And most significantly, the statements from the Tapas 7 contained discrepancies that would later fuel speculation. Jane Tanner's sighting of the man carrying a child, initially considered the abductor, would be called into question. The direction the figure was walking, the description of the child's pajamas, even the timing of when she saw this person would all become points of contention. And one member of the group would eventually break ranks, providing information that contradicted this carefully constructed narrative. Where were you when you first heard about this case? For many, the news of Madeleine's disappearance marked the beginning of an obsession with a mystery that remains unsolved 16 years later. If you're getting value from this deep dive into one of the most perplexing cases of our time, please like this video. It helps others find this content and supports more in-depth investigations like this one. As the night of May 3rd turned into the early hours of May 4th, the alarm had been raised. But the contradictions in the Tapas 7's accounts were just beginning to surface. Contradictions that would eventually lead one member to shatter their collective silence. By dawn on May 4th, the search for Madeleine had expanded beyond the Ocean Club's boundaries. Local police, resort staff, and volunteers combed the beaches, vacant properties, and scrubland surrounding Praia da Luz. Roadblocks should have been established immediately. The Spanish border lay just 2 hours away. But this crucial step wasn't implemented until the following day. The initial Portuguese police response revealed a system unprepared for such a case. The Polícia Judiciária, PJ, had never handled a foreign child's disappearance of this magnitude. Officers failed to secure the crime scene, allowing dozens of people to walk through apartment 5A, contaminating potential evidence. Fingerprints weren't collected until the next day. Bed sheets weren't preserved. Critical forensic opportunities vanished in those first hours. It was as if they were investigating a stolen car, not a stolen child. One British police expert would later comment, "The case quickly transcended Portugal's borders." By May 5th, British media descended on the small resort town, Satellite trucks lined the narrow streets. The McCanns, guided by the British consul, made their first public appeal. Gerry speaking firmly, while Kate clutched Madeleine's stuffed animal Cuddle Cat, visibly distraught. The image of this grieving mother would become iconic, though later scrutinized for signs of genuine versus performative emotion. Within a week, the case had become a global phenomenon. Celebrities including J.K. Rowling, Richard Branson, and David Beckham made public appeals. Pope Benedict XVI blessed a photograph of Madeleine during the McCann's visit to the Vatican. A reward fund swelled to $2.5 million with contributions from wealthy benefactors. The Find Madeleine campaign launched with unprecedented reach, her image appearing on billboards across Europe. The early investigation focused on a potential abduction. Portuguese police initially pursued Robert Murat, a British-Portuguese property consultant, who lived with his mother 150 yards from the McCann's apartment. Murat had inserted himself into the investigation as a translator, raising suspicions with his eager involvement. On May 15th, he was named an arguido, formal suspect, after British tabloid journalists reported his suspicious behavior. For 3 months, Murat endured intense scrutiny. His home searched multiple times with ground-penetrating radar. No evidence connected him to Madeleine's disappearance, and he was eventually cleared, later winning substantial libel damages from British newspapers. As the investigation progressed, attention shifted to the inconsistencies in the Tapas 7 statements. Their initial police interviews, conducted separately, revealed discrepancies in the timeline of checks. Who saw what, and when? Portuguese investigators became increasingly suspicious of the group's coordinated accounts. Jane Tanner's sighting of a man carrying a child, initially the primary lead, came under particular scrutiny. She described a man walking away from the McCann apartment around 9:15 p.m. carrying a pajama-clad child. Yet another witness, Irish tourist Martin Smith, reported seeing a different man carrying a child toward the beach around 10:00 p.m. The descriptions didn't match, creating confusion about whether these were separate individuals or the same person at different times. The Tapas 7 closed ranks as media pressure intensified. They refused additional interviews with Portuguese authorities and limited their public statements. This collective silence fueled speculation about what they might be hiding. Were they protecting the McCanns? Themselves? Or was there something more sinister behind their reluctance to speak freely? By late July 2007, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Forensic dogs from the UK were brought to Portugal. These highly trained animals, one specialized in detecting human blood, the other in detecting human cadaver odor, alerted in several locations: the McCann's apartment, particularly behind the sofa, their rental car, obtained 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance, and on some of Kate's clothing and Madeleine's stuffed animal. These alerts, combined with what Portuguese authorities claimed was DNA evidence, later disputed by British experts as inconclusive, led to a shocking development. On September 7, 2007, Kate and Gerry McCann were named as arguidos in their daughter's disappearance. The Portuguese theory suggested Madeleine had died accidentally in the apartment, possibly from sedatives administered to help her sleep, though no evidence supported this, and that the parents had disposed of her body and staged an abduction. The McCanns vehemently denied these allegations and returned to England on September 9th, where they began building a legal defense. Throughout this period, the Tapas 7 maintained a united front. They released a joint statement supporting the McCanns and denying any knowledge of what happened to Madeleine. But behind closed doors, tensions were mounting. The friends found themselves caught between loyalty and increasing pressure from authorities. Documents later released showed Portuguese police believed the group had engaged in a pact of silence to protect the McCanns. Investigators noted that despite being medical professionals accustomed to precise observations, their statements contained convenient memory gaps around critical times. Phone records showed a flurry of calls between group members in the days following the disappearance. Communications they struggled to explain. What theory do you believe about what happened that night? Was Madeleine taken by an opportunistic predator who noticed the family's routine? Did she wander out of the apartment? Or was there truth to the darker theories that implicated those closest to her? The case has divided opinion like few others, with evidence supporting multiple possibilities. For more in-depth crime analysis like this, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We dive deep into the evidence, exploring angles that mainstream coverage often misses. As months passed without a breakthrough, the case reached an impasse. The Portuguese investigation stalled, hampered by jurisdictional limitations, media interference, and the deteriorating relationship between Portuguese and British authorities. But one member of the Tapas 7 was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the narrative they had helped construct, a discomfort that would eventually lead them to break the silence that had protected the group for years. For 7 years, the wall of silence surrounding the Tapas 7 remained impenetrable. They gave coordinated statements, declined additional interviews with Portuguese authorities, and presented a united front in support of the McCanns. But beneath this solidarity, fractures were forming, particularly for Jane Tanner, whose testimony about the man she allegedly saw carrying a child had become the foundation of the abduction theory. Jane Tanner wasn't just any holiday acquaintance. Her partner, Russell O'Brien, had known Gerry McCann professionally for years. Both worked in academic medicine, attending conferences together and maintaining a friendship that extended beyond their careers. Jane, a marketing executive, had become close with Kate through these connections. Their daughters played together during the Portugal vacation, creating bonds that made the events of May 3rd all the more devastating. Of all the Tapas 7, Jane carried the heaviest burden. Her sighting, a man carrying a pajama-clad child across the road near the McCann apartment around 9:15 p.m., had shaped the entire investigation. This testimony provided the McCanns with a crucial timeline. If Madeleine was taken at 9:15 p.m., then the parents' checks at 8:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. bracketed the abduction, potentially absolving them of direct involvement. But inconsistencies plagued her account from the beginning. In her initial statement, Jane described seeing a man carrying a child wearing pajamas similar to Madeleine's, yet she couldn't clearly describe the man's face or the child's. The direction he was walking, away from the McCann apartment toward the Murat property, became significant. And most troublingly, no other witnesses, including Gerry McCann and Jeremy Wilkins, a tennis instructor Gerry was chatting with on the street at approximately the same time, saw this figure. As the years passed, Jane's certainty about what she saw that night began to waver. Friends noticed her becoming increasingly withdrawn when the case was mentioned. She avoided media appearances and declined documentary interviews. While the other Tapas 7 members occasionally spoke to journalists, Jane remained conspicuously silent. The breaking point came in late 2013. Scotland Yard's Operation Grange, the British review of the case launched in 2011, had been methodically re-examining every piece of evidence. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood approached Jane with disturbing news. They had identified the man she saw that night. He wasn't an abductor but an innocent British tourist carrying his own daughter back from the resort's evening childcare. This revelation devastated Jane. Her sighting, the cornerstone of the abduction timeline, was wrong. The man she'd seen had nothing to do with Madeleine's disappearance. For 6 years she'd lived with the weight of this testimony, only to discover it was a tragic case of mistaken identity. "I've been living a lie," she reportedly told investigators during a closed-door session. "Not intentionally, but the implications of my mistake are enormous." What followed was an extraordinary series of confidential interviews with Operation Grange detectives. Over several days, Jane provided a revised account that contradicted key elements of her original testimony. She admitted to uncertainties she hadn't previously disclosed. Most significantly, she revealed conversations among the Tapas group that had never been shared with authorities. According to sources close to the investigation, Jane described a meeting in the McCann's apartment on May 4th, the morning after Madeleine's disappearance, where the group discussed what they had seen and heard. During this meeting, timelines were established, check times were agreed upon, and a narrative began to form that would be presented to police. While not explicitly conspiratorial, This coordination helped explain the consistent yet sometimes too perfect alignment of their statements. Jane also revealed her growing doubts about the timeline of checks. The restaurant staff had contradicted the group's claim of regular visits to the apartments, suggesting the children were checked less frequently than stated. Jane confirmed these discrepancies, admitting that the 30-minute check schedule had been aspirational rather than actual on some nights, including May 3rd. Most explosively, Jane disclosed her observations of tensions within the McCann marriage during the vacation, information she had previously withheld as irrelevant. She described witnessing an argument between Kate and Gerry on May 2nd, the night before Madeleine's disappearance, regarding childcare arrangements. This new information opened avenues of investigation into the family dynamics that had been previously unexplored. The implications of Jane's revised testimony were seismic. Without her sighting, the 9:15 p.m. abduction theory collapsed. This shifted the timeline, creating a longer window during which Madeleine could have disappeared, potentially implicating different suspects and scenarios. It also raised uncomfortable questions about why the group had so firmly maintained a narrative built around a sighting that one of their own had come to doubt. Operation Grange investigators recalibrated their entire approach based on Jane's new information. They began exploring alternative timelines, interviewing previously overlooked witnesses, and revisiting statements from resort staff and guests. This fresh perspective led to the identification of new persons of interest and the elimination of others who had been suspects for years. For the McCanns, Jane's decision to revise her testimony created complex emotions. While they publicly expressed support for her courage in correcting the record, private communications revealed their distress at how this undermined the abduction narrative they had championed for years. The foundation of their public campaign, that Madeleine was taken while they dined nearby, now rested on shakier ground. The other Tapas 7 members responded with varying degrees of support and concern. Some privately reached out to Jane, acknowledging their own doubts about elements of their testimonies. Others distanced themselves, worried about the implications of reopening their involvement in the case. The unified front that had characterized the group for years began to fracture. But here's what most people don't realize. Jane Tanner's revised testimony didn't just change the investigation's direction. It fundamentally altered how authorities viewed the reliability of the entire group's statements. If one key witness had maintained an incorrect account for years, what other errors or omissions might exist in the collective narrative? This question led investigators to re-interview all Tapas 7 members with a more critical approach. Previously accepted timelines were challenged, assumptions were questioned. The protective bubble around the group's account began to dissolve as each statement was re-examined in light of Jane's revelations. For Jane herself, breaking ranks came at significant personal cost. She faced backlash from those who viewed her as betraying the McCanns. Media outlets pursued her relentlessly. Her relationship with Russell O'Brien reportedly strained under the pressure, yet she maintained that correcting the record was necessary, regardless of where the truth might lead. "I can't change what happened to Madeleine," she told a confidant, "but I can stop perpetuating something I know isn't accurate. That little girl deserves the truth, whatever it is." Jane Tanner's revised testimony catalyzed a fundamental shift in the Madeleine McCann investigation. Operation Grange, initially established in 2011 as a review of the case, transitioned into a full investigation with new lines of inquiry. The $13 million operation, funded by the UK Home Office, abandoned the 9:15 p.m. abduction timeline and reconstructed the case from first principles. This reset produced tangible results. In 2017, Scotland Yard announced they were pursuing a significant line of inquiry with international implications. Rather than focusing on a random predator, investigators now believed Madeleine's disappearance was a planned operation potentially involving multiple individuals. The theory that she was targeted specifically, rather than being a victim of opportunity, gained credibility. The most significant breakthrough came in June 2020, when German prosecutors identified Christian Brueckner, a 43-year-old German national, as their prime suspect. Brueckner, a convicted sex offender with a history of burglary, lived intermittently in the Algarve between 1995 and 2007. Phone records placed him in Praia da Luz on the night of Madeleine's disappearance. His criminal history included sexual offenses against children and elderly women. German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters made the extraordinary statement that they were investigating Brueckner on suspicion of murder and believed Madeleine was dead. This marked the first time any official authority had publicly stated they believed Madeleine had not survived, a devastating blow to the McCanns, who had maintained hope for 16 years. The investigation into Brueckner revealed disturbing connections to the case. He drove a distinctive VW camper van and Jaguar car in the area. A former associate claimed Brueckner had bragged about knowing all about Madeleine's disappearance. Searches of his former properties in Germany uncovered USB drives containing child abuse images and videos. While concrete evidence directly linking him to Madeleine remains elusive, German authorities maintain they have circumstantial evidence sufficient for their conviction. As of 2023, Brueckner remains in prison in Germany for unrelated offenses, including the rape of a 72-year-old American woman in Praia da Luz in 2005. Portuguese authorities, working with German investigators, formally declared him an arguido in the McCann case in April 2022, preventing the statute of limitations from expiring. This legal maneuver keeps the case active while evidence continues to be gathered. The Tapas 7 have scattered since that fateful night, their lives forever altered by their peripheral involvement in one of history's most notorious missing person cases. Jane Tanner and Russell O'Brien relocated multiple times, seeking anonymity away from media attention. Their relationship reportedly survived the strain of Jane's revised testimony, though they maintained strict privacy. Matthew and Rachel Oldfield returned to their medical careers, but have declined all interview requests since 2011. The Paynes, David, Fiona, and Diane Webster, similarly withdrew from public view, with David leaving his medical practice for a period following intense scrutiny. The McCanns remain in their original home in Rothley, Leicestershire. Kate left medicine to focus on charity work and advocacy for missing children. Gerry continues his career as a cardiologist. Their twins, Sean and Amelie, now teenagers, have been raised with knowledge of their sister, but protected from media intrusion. The family maintains the official Find Madeleine campaign, which continues to receive donations and tips. Portuguese detective Gonçalo Amaral, who initially led the investigation and was removed after criticizing British authorities, published a controversial book titled The Truth of the Lie, advancing his theory that Madeleine died accidentally in the apartment and the parents covered it up. The ensuing legal battle between Amaral and the McCanns lasted over a decade, with Portugal's highest court ultimately ruling in Amaral's favor, allowing the book's publication. The legacy of Madeleine's disappearance extends far beyond the individuals directly involved. The case transformed how missing children are investigated internationally, highlighting jurisdictional challenges and communication barriers between law enforcement agencies. It prompted the creation of new protocols for child abduction cases across Europe. Media coverage of the case redefined the relationship between journalism, public interest, and private tragedy. The McCanns' initial embrace of media attention, followed by their bitter experience with tabloid excesses, serves as a cautionary tale about the double-edged sword of publicity in missing person cases. For the tourism industry, particularly family resorts, Madeleine's disappearance prompted significant security upgrades. Child supervision policies were tightened, surveillance systems enhanced, and staff training improved. The Madeleine effect made child safety a marketing priority for family destinations worldwide. Perhaps most significantly, the case altered public perception of parental responsibility. The McCanns' decision to leave their children unattended while dining nearby sparked intense debate about acceptable childcare practices. This conversation continues today, with the phrase "doing a McCann" entering colloquial language as a reference to leaving children unsupervised. What do you think will ultimately happen with this case? Will Christian Brueckner be formally charged and tried? Will new evidence emerge from Jane Tanner's revised testimony? Or will Madeleine's fate remain one of crime's most enduring mysteries? The investigation continues, with German prosecutors promising resolution, Portuguese authorities reopening old leads, and British police maintaining that the case remains active. While official funding for Operation Grange has been reduced, detectives continue to follow specific lines of inquiry deemed promising. For the Tapas 7, particularly Jane Tanner, the decision to break silence came at personal cost, but may ultimately contribute to justice. Her courage in correcting the record, despite the implications for herself and her friends, demonstrates that even years later, truth can emerge from the most carefully constructed narratives. If this analysis gave you a new perspective on this infamous case, please share it with someone who appreciates true crime. Understanding the human elements behind headlines helps us comprehend not just what happened, but why, and perhaps how similar tragedies might be prevented in the future. When Jane Tanner finally broke her silence after years of maintaining a flawed narrative, she demonstrated an essential truth about complex cases. Sometimes the most significant breakthroughs come not from new evidence, but from the re-examination of what we thought we already knew. Her decision to revise her testimony, to admit that the figure she saw carrying a child was not Madeleine's abductor, required extraordinary courage. It meant acknowledging that a cornerstone of the investigation, one that had directed resources and shaped public perception for years, was built on a mistake. This act of truth-telling reminds us that in high-profile cases, the pressure to provide answers can lead witnesses to convince themselves of certainties where none exist. Jane's eventual honesty didn't solve the mystery, but it cleared away a false lead that had obscured potential paths to the truth. In doing so, she demonstrated that loyalty to facts ultimately serves justice better than loyalty to a narrative, no matter how comforting that narrative might be. Yet profound questions remain unanswered 16 years after Madeleine vanished. If Christian Brueckner is indeed responsible, how did he identify the McCann apartment as a target? Was Madeleine's disappearance opportunistic or planned? Did he act alone or with accomplices? The German prosecution's confidence suggests they possess evidence not yet revealed to the public, perhaps communications or confessions from Brueckner's criminal associates. If Brueckner is not responsible, then who is? The Smith family sighting of a man carrying a child toward the beach around 10 p.m., described by some investigators as more credible than Jane's earlier sighting, has never been conclusively identified. This figure, walking away from the resort rather than toward other apartments, suggests a different escape route than initially considered. And what of the forensic evidence? The alerts by cadaver dogs in the apartment and rental car were dismissed by some as unreliable. Yet these highly trained animals have proven accurate in numerous other cases. The DNA evidence, deemed inconclusive by British experts but considered significant by Portuguese investigators, remains a point of contention among forensic specialists. Perhaps the most important legacy of Madeleine's case is its impact on child safety awareness. Parents worldwide became more vigilant about supervision, less trusting of seemingly secure environments. Resorts and hotels implemented stricter security protocols. Law enforcement agencies developed more efficient cross-border communication procedures for missing children cases. These changes have undoubtedly protected countless children from harm, a bittersweet legacy for a little girl who never had the chance to grow up. The story of Madeleine McCann and the Tapas 7 ultimately transcends true crime. It's about how tragedy tests human relationships, how pressure reveals character, and how truth eventually demands acknowledgement, even when that acknowledgement comes at great personal cost. Jane Tanner's decision to correct the record, years after the fact, reminds us that it's never too late to align ourselves with truth. As this case continues to unfold, with German prosecutors promising resolution and Portuguese authorities pursuing new leads, we're reminded that justice operates on its own timeline. For Madeleine, for her family, and for all those touched by this case, that timeline has been agonizingly long. But as Jane Tanner demonstrated, even after years of silence, crucial truths can still emerge. Join our community by subscribing and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on developments in this case and other in-depth true crime analyses. Together, we can continue examining these complex human stories not merely for their mystery, but for what they teach us about justice, truth, and our collective responsibility to protect the most vulnerable among us.